He had spent 8 long years speaking to no one but the mountains, until the day a husky stepped out of the timber and placed its head against his chest, and something inside him finally cracked open. Kang, because the dog wasn't just lost. Crimson. It carried a message from the one person he thought he'd failed forever. And when Cole Maddox followed where that husky led, he didn't just uncover a trail. He found the first piece of his heart he thought was gone for good. Late autumn had settled over the Pinecrest Range, that wild stretch of Wyoming where the air carried both the bite of coming winter and the lingering sweetness of summer pine, and where silence was not emptiness, but the living breath of the mountains themselves. The sky had begun to pale toward evening, soft gold sliding across the granite peaks like a final blessing before night, and the wind, thin, restless, moved through the high timberline with a sound that had always reminded Cole Maddox of distant voices whispering the things men tried so hard to forget. Cole, 42 and worn in the way only mountain men and old soldiers ever truly were, trudged up the dirt path toward his hand-built cabin with an armful of split pine and spruce. His long duster coat, sun-faded brown and weather-scarred, flapped gently at his sides, framing a broad-shouldered frame hardened by years of hauling survivors through burning forests. His hair, once jet black, now carried threads of ash above a jawline darkened by days of stubble. There was a heaviness to him, a man who moved as quietly as the snowfall and wore grief like an old companion. 8 years had passed since the fire, the inferno that swallowed half a mountain slope, and the only person Cole had ever sworn he would die before losing. His younger brother, Liam Maddox Rourke. Cole survived. Liam did not. And Cole, unable to carry the weight of the world or the disappointed kindness of other people, retreated to this cabin high above Pinecrest Valley, choosing a life where silence couldn't judge him and cold couldn't burn him worse than memory already had. He lived alone, spoke little, cooked simple meals, and kept his heart locked the way some men locked liquor cabinets, tightly, and for good reason. And yet, on that evening, when the daylight thinned and dust motes drifted slow as snowflakes through the air, everything began to shift. Cole had just dropped the stack of firewood by the porch steps when a soft crunch sounded from the tree line. He straightened, instinct sharp even after years of solitude, ready for cougar or stray elk. Instead, a shape emerged from a band of shadow, graceful, deliberate, almost ghost-like in the fading light. A husky. Not the wild gray coats that roamed these mountains sometimes, but a true Siberian husky, thick fur of silver and cream, a proud tail, and eyes of startling ice blue that fixed on Cole as if measuring him, knowing him. The dog stood 3 yards away, calm and unafraid, head slightly tilted with an intelligence that felt unsettling. Cole's breath caught. He hadn't seen a tame husky up here in years. No tracks, no campers, no lost hikers. And yet this one approached him as though returning to a place it had always belonged. Cole knelt slowly, one hand extended, and the husky stepped forward, pressing its head gently into his palm as if greeting an old friend. The moment they made contact, a faint metallic chime broke the stillness. Cole frowned and brushed aside the thick ruff of fur at the dog's neck. A small metal tag hung from a worn leather collar, dinged, weathered, but unmistakably engraved with 3 letters. LMR. Liam Maddox Rourke. Cole's heart seemed to stop. His mouth went dry. His vision tunneled to that single, impossible piece of metal. For years, the world had told him that Liam was gone, consumed by flame, his body never recovered. Cole had buried an empty box and lived with the certainty that the fire had taken all that remained of the only family he had left. But now, Now, a dog he'd never seen before carried Liam's initials around its neck as if it were some message sent across the years. "No," Cole whispered, fingers trembling against the warm fur. This can't be." The husky lifted its head and met Cole's eyes, calm, steady, understanding in a way no ordinary animal's gaze should ever be. And for a second, Cole felt something he had not felt in 8 long years. The spark of possibility, thin as thread, warm as an ember buried under ash. He stepped back, shaken to the bone, but the dog simply sat, tail curling around its paws as though waiting, watching, deciding. And somehow Cole knew, without logic, without sense, that the husky wanted him to follow. That night, sleep came to Cole in broken shards filled with the memory of Liam's laugh echoing across the Pinecrest canyons and the whispered stories Liam once told him as boys, stories about Kedabietzubimatquokonmui, hidden cracks in the mountains where the world held truths no map had ever shown. At dawn, with frost clinging to the grass like silver dust, Cole opened the cabin door and found the husky already there, sitting squarely in the path, gaze intent and unyielding. When Cole stepped outside, the dog rose and trotted toward the forest, pausing only to glance back, making sure he followed. And Cole did. Through timber groves he'd never explored, past boulders shaped like old guardians of the range, across trickles of frozen runoff that whispered faintly under their ice. Every turn the husky made stirred something in Cole's memory, distant, fogged, but real. The mountains he thought he knew seemed to open into places he had never seen, yet somehow recognized in the marrow of his bones. Somewhere between the shifting light and the rise of the wind, Cole realized he was breathing harder, not from the climb, but from the strange familiarity of these trails. Liam had spoken of them, spoken of a hidden place he wanted to show Cole someday, a place he never lived long enough to lead him to. By midday, Cole stopped at a rocky clearing he was certain he'd never visited, but the husky stared at him with a look that said otherwise. That look chilled him, like memory wearing the shape of a dog. And when Cole whispered, "What are you trying to show me?" the husky merely turned its head toward the towering cliffside as if the answer waited there in stone. Cole didn't yet understand, but he would. By the time they returned to the cabin that afternoon, his chest burned with questions he wasn't ready to say aloud. And that was when another unexpected presence stepped into his life. A truck engine rumbled faintly up the broken trail, rare enough to make Cole stiffen. The door opened and out stepped Ruth Calder, the woman he once believed would be his future before grief tore him away from anyone who tried to love him. Ruth, with auburn hair pulled loosely under a wool hat, sharp amber eyes trained by years of tending injured animals, and a posture both gentle and unflinchingly strong. She wore a quilted vest over a flannel shirt, mud-stained boots, and the kind of look that told Cole she'd rehearsed this visit 100 times before deciding to come. They hadn't spoken in nearly 5 years. Not since Cole had pushed her away, drowning in guilt so deep he didn't believe anyone deserved to wade into it with him. "Cole?" she said quietly, voice carrying both surprise and concern as she spotted the husky at his side. "I came because folks in town saw a white husky heading into these mountains. I wanted to make sure it wasn't injured." Her gaze softened when the dog stepped closer to Cole, leaning lightly into his leg as though claiming him. And when she looked back up, something flickered in her eyes, a tenderness she refused to let take shape. "That dog," Ruth murmured. "I've seen one just like it, years ago. With Liam." The entire forest seemed to fall silent. Cole froze, breath stolen clean from his lungs. "A day before the fire," she added softly. I never forgot those eyes. Cole felt the ground shift under him, felt the weight of the collar's initials pressing against his chest like a heartbeat not his own. The husky walked to the edge of the trail, turned, and sat, staring into the trees as if marking the entrance to some unseen path. Ruth noticed. "It's waiting for something," she whispered. Cole didn't answer, because deep inside the hollowed-out chambers of his heart, something ancient and aching began to stir. What if Liam hadn't left him? What if this dog carried a truth he was meant to follow? What if the mountains, in their strange and silent way, were giving him one last chance? As the sun dipped behind the ridge, the husky remained at the trail's mouth, posture alert and oddly solemn, eyes glinting like captured starlight. And Cole, standing beside Ruth in the long shadow of the pines, felt the truth settle over him like the mountain twilight itself, quiet, certain, undeniable. Something was calling him, something Liam had never finished saying, something waiting somewhere deep in Pinecrest Range. And for the first time in 8 years, Cole Maddox dared to believe that the story of his brother wasn't over. The third morning broke cold and colorless over the Pinecrest Range, the kind of steel-gray dawn that seeped into a man's bones and made every memory feel sharper than it had any right to be. And Cole Maddox woke not to the crackle of the stove or the creak of settling logs, but to a firm tug at his sleeve. For a heartbeat he thought he was back in a fire camp tent, Liam shaking him awake for another shift on the line. But when his eyes opened, he found himself staring into ice-blue pupils only inches from his face. The husky stood beside the bed, paws planted, teeth closing and releasing gently on the cuff of his flannel shirt, tugging once more before letting go and backing toward the door with a low, insistent whine. "All right, I'm up," Cole muttered, voice rough with sleep and something heavier. But the dog didn't relax until he swung his legs to the floor. Outside, pale light filtered through the window, revealing frost stiff on the porch railing and a sky smudged with thin clouds dragging over the peaks. As he dressed, layers of thermal, wool, and his old smoke-stained duster, Cole couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just another morning in the high country. There was purpose rolling off the dog in quiet waves, the same kind of focused urgency he'd seen in seasoned rescue animals on search deployments. By the time he laced his boots, the husky was already at the door, tail held level, ears pricked like an arrow pointing toward a single direction. Cole shrugged on his pack, checking the contents by muscle memory: water, first aid kit, rope, a flashlight older than some of the trees out there. And when he opened the door, the cold punched him full in the chest. Ruth was on the porch, breath fogging in the air, a worn canvas day pack slung over one shoulder, and determination written in every line of her stance. She wore a dark green parka that set off the copper strands of hair escaping her hat, and there was a stubborn tilt to her chin that Cole remembered from arguments years ago, back when he still believed he could protect people by pushing them away. "You're not going alone," she said before he could speak. "The folks in town didn't see a ghost dog. They saw this one. And if it's leading you God knows where, I'm coming." Cole's first instinct was to argue, to remind her of the terrain, of the way weather could flip like a coin up here. But the husky brushed past him and trotted straight to Ruth, bumping her knee with its muzzle, as if sealing the decision. She smiled despite herself and scratched behind its ears, and something about that simple, easy touch made the protest die in Cole's throat. "Fine," he said at last, tightening the shoulder straps of his pack. "But you stay behind me. If things turn bad, then we deal with it," Ruth cut in, eyes steady. "Together." The word hung between them, fragile and unfamiliar after so many years of silence. The husky didn't wait. for them to sort anything else out. It turned and headed down the path, paws barely whispering on the frozen ground. They followed. The forest greeted them with a hush that felt almost expectant. Tall lodgepole pines rose on either side of the narrow trail, their trunks black against the thin smear of morning light, and the smell of cold sap and old earth wrapped around the three of them as they walked. At first, the route was familiar, switchbacks Cole had hiked 100 times for firewood or just to outrun his own thoughts. But soon the dog veered off, slipping between trees into country he'd never bothered to chart. With every step, the air seemed to change. The wind shifted directions without warning, carrying scents from places that shouldn't have been upwind at all. The dry tang of sage from the lower slopes, the loamy breath of hidden creek beds, the faint ash ghost of long cold burns. Needles shivered overhead, though no gust touched their faces, like the forest was reacting to some current they couldn't feel. Cole kept his eyes moving, reading sign out of habit. There were deer tracks, old elk prints, the faint punch of a fox's delicate feet. But one set of marks troubled him more than any predator could have. His own. Faint echoes in the dirt where he knew damn well he'd never walked. It was as if the mountain had been rehearsing this path for him in his absence. Here and there the husky paused at boulders, scarred with thin, deliberate lines, marks that might have passed for weathering if Cole hadn't recognized the pattern. Years ago, Liam had filled the margins of his journal with sketches of symbols he claimed he'd seen scrawled on hidden rock faces, intersecting lines, triangles nested inside circles, not quite letters, not quite maps. Cole had teased him about chasing mountain hieroglyphs instead of sleep. But now, running gloved fingers over grooves in the stone that matched those drawings exactly, he felt the sting of every time he hadn't listened. "These what he used to talk about?" Ruth asked quietly, tracing one of the symbols with her gaze rather than her hand, respectful as she would be around a wounded animal. Cole nodded, throat tight. "I thought he was just trying to make sense of things after deployments. Guess I was wrong." The husky huffed softly and moved on, deeper into the timber, taking them along narrow benches and across slope breaks where the ground tilted and rolled underfoot. Several times the apparent way ahead faded into bramble and shadow, and just as Cole was about to call the dog back, a gap would appear, two trunks leaning apart like a doorway, a downed log forming a natural bridge over an otherwise impassable cut. It felt less like they were choosing a route and more like the mountain was opening one step at a time as the husky approached, the world rearranging itself around a path only it could see. 3 hours later, sweat cooled on Cole's back despite the low temperature, and his breaths came with a rasp that had nothing to do with altitude. The trees thinned, replaced by broken rock and scrub, and the sound reached them. At first a murmur under all the other mountain noises, then clearer. Water. Not rushing, not tumbling, but breathing. A steady inhale, exhale through stone. The husky crested a final rise and stopped. Below them, carved into the flank of the ridge, yawned a massive cleft in the rock, tall and narrow, its interior shadowed, that soft, watery whisper spilling out like the exhale of something ancient. Cole stared, memory slotting into place with a painful clarity. Liam, at 20, sitting beside a campfire, eyes bright with some secret he wasn't ready to share. "If you ever want to really understand me, big brother, find the crack that sounds like a creek breathing. That's where it all makes sense." Cole had laughed then, chalked it up to too much caffeine and not enough sleep. No one else had taken him seriously either. Looking at the fissure now, feeling that slow, alive sound moving over his skin, Cole realized just how utterly wrong he'd been. "This is it," he whispered. "He told me about this place. I didn't listen." Ruth's gloved hand brushed his elbow. "You're listening now," she said softly. "That's what matters." The husky descended first, sure-footed on the scree, and slipped into the crack without hesitation. Cole and Ruth squeezed in after it, shoulders nearly scraping stone on either side. Inside, the light dimmed to a cool blue-gray, and the temperature dropped. The sound of water grew louder, echoing off the walls until it felt like they were walking inside the throat of some sleeping giant. After a dozen paces, the passage widened just enough for them to stand side by side. The floor leveled into a natural ledge, and there, tucked into a recess in the rock almost at eye level, sat a metal box no larger than a lunch pail, its surface blackened and slick with old soot. Someone had wrapped it in layers of fire-resistant cloth, the kind used to protect equipment in direct flame. Cole recognized it instantly. He'd done the same thing with radios and map cases on bad days out west. His hands shook as he peeled the stiffened wrapping back, revealing a box stamped with the faint outline of a manufacturer's logo long since dulled by heat. The latch gave under his thumb, and the lid creaked open. Inside lay a battered Zippo lighter with a scratched eagle etched into the side, the same one Liam used to flick open with a one-handed flourish that drove their captain crazy during quiet nights on the line. A curled fragment of topographic map browned at the edges, and a single page torn from a spiral notebook, its lines blurred at the corners, but the center text still dark and sharp. Cole lifted the paper with reverent care. The handwriting was unmistakable. Liam's, quick and angular, like every letter was trying to outrun the next. "Don't carry this blame forever, Cole. If I don't make it back in time, let the husky show you where I learned to breathe again." The words hit harder than any falling tree, any wall of flame. Cole's knees buckled, dropping him onto the cold stone. The chill bit through denim, anchoring him in the moment as tears he hadn't allowed himself in 8 years finally spilled over, hot against the mountain air. "He knew," Cole choked. "He knew I'd spend the rest of my life thinking it was my fault." Ruth knelt beside him, the fabric of her parka rustling softly. She set a steady hand on his shoulder, fingers digging in just enough to remind him she was real, that he wasn't alone in this narrow crack between past and present. "You've been living in that fire ever since," she said, voice low, a mixture of anger and tenderness. "Up here, in this cabin. You kept breathing, but you never really came out. Cole, you can't keep punishing yourself for a storm you didn't start." He didn't answer, couldn't find words, but his free hand groped for hers, closing around it with a grip that carried every unsent apology, every unsaid plea for help. She didn't pull away. The husky padded closer, pressing its head against Cole's thigh, those blue eyes shining in the half-light with a depth that made the hairs on his arms stand up. The air in the fissure shifted. A thin beam of daylight speared down from some unseen crack above, striking the damp wall opposite them and bouncing in a pale shimmer across the trickle of water that slid along the floor. Where the light touched the flow, the surface glowed, not blinding, not unnatural exactly, but with a soft luminescence like moonlight caught in liquid form. Ruth sucked in a sharp breath and instinctively leaned back, but Cole felt something different, not fear, but recognition, as if the mountain were nodding, acknowledging the letter in his hand, the grief in his chest. The tiny stream's glow brightened for a heartbeat, and the whisper of water rose in pitch, curling around the stone, threading through the air. In it, carried on the susurrus of liquid over rock, came a sound that wasn't quite a word and yet landed in his mind as clearly as if someone had spoken right beside him. "Brother." His chest convulsed. He clutched the page to his heart, eyes squeezed shut as tears ran unchecked down his face. The husky tilted its head back and released a low, resonant howl that filled the narrow chamber, the note rising and falling with a strange, aching beauty. It bounced from wall to wall, twining with the water's whisper until the whole fissure seemed to sing with shared loss and something that felt very much like release. In that sound, Cole heard no accusation, no replay of the worst night of his life, only farewell and a gentle push forward, like a hand between his shoulder blades urging him out of the flames and into whatever waited beyond. The glow along the stream softened, fading back into ordinary light, but the change inside him remained. Liam had not died abandoned and afraid in those woods. He had found some measure of peace here, enough to leave a trail for the stubborn brother he knew would spend a lifetime trying to fix the unfixable. Cole wiped his face with the back of his wrist, breathing in slow, shaky pulls. He looked at Ruth, really looked, and saw not just the woman he'd left behind, but the one who had come anyway, knowing there were ghosts here she couldn't banish, but determined to stand beside him while he faced them. Outside the fissure, the light had shifted toward afternoon by the time they stepped back into open air, the wind brushing their faces like a benediction. Their descent felt different from the climb. The mountains were the same stone, same trees, same distant peaks, but Cole walked with a looseness he hadn't known since before the fire, as if some invisible pack he'd been shouldering had finally slipped from his back. The husky trotted ahead at an easy pace, glancing over its shoulder now and then to make sure they kept up, but no longer radiating that fierce urgency. It had completed the task it had been given, whatever strange contract lay behind its bright eyes. Back at the cabin, dusk laid a wash of copper over the clearing. Cole set the box gently on the table inside, the lighter and map fragment beside the letter, small relics of a man whose presence still hummed in the air. Without ceremony, he reached for the old satellite radio he kept for emergencies, thumbed the worn button, and called in a message to the dispatch office he'd walked away from years ago. His voice was calm, steady as he asked about current openings on the wildfire crews, about retraining, about coming back. Not to outrun something this time, but because he finally remembered who he was when he wasn't drowning. When he stepped back onto the porch, Ruth was there, leaning against the rail, arms folded, watching the sky bleed from gold to indigo. The husky sat at the top of the steps, gaze fixed on the darkening tree line like a sentinel. Cole moved to stand beside her, their shoulders almost touching. For a long moment they said nothing. The night wind came down from the ridges, cool and carrying with it a sound that tugged at something deep in Cole's chest, a faint, familiar chuckle woven into the rustle of needles, like the echo of Liam laughing at some private joke only the mountains now shared. Cole let out a breath that felt like the first true exhale in 8 years. "Thank you, kid," he said quietly, eyes on the shadowed slopes, "for showing me the way, one last time." The husky nudged his hand with a wet nose, a soft huff of breath that felt very much like acknowledgement. Beside him, Ruth's fingers brushed his, not quite a full clasp, not yet, but enough to promise there was more ahead than the cabin walls and empty winters. Above them, the pine crest peaks loomed against the darkening sky. But instead of the weight of a tombstone, they now carried the quiet strength of a home returned. In that gathering night, with a husky at his side and the woman he'd once loved within reach, Cole Maddox understood that the range that had swallowed his past was now handing something back. The fragile beginnings of hope. The courage to open his heart again. and a trail that didn't end in fire, but in a future he was finally ready to walk toward. In the end, Cole learned something the mountains had been trying to tell him for years. Sometimes, healing does not arrive as a roar or a revelation. Sometimes it comes quietly, in the shape of a loyal husky, in the memory of a brother's love, or in the gentle way God nudges a wounded heart back toward the light. The world will always hold moments that break us, but it also holds moments that rebuild us if we dare to follow the signs placed in our path. And just like Cole, we all walk through seasons of loss, guilt, and silence. Yet grace has a way of reaching us exactly where we are, reminding us that no soul is too far gone to be lifted, and no story is too broken to be rewritten. If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs a reminder that hope can return. Leave a comment below and tell us where you were watching from and what part of Cole's journey spoke to you. And if you would like more stories of faith, healing, and the quiet miracles hidden in the wilderness, make sure to subscribe to the channel. May God bless you and your family wherever your trail leads next.